Welcome to VNN again for our next part of our discussion on the Kashmir files and about the history of Kashmir. We have two Kashmiri activists with us, like last week, Vidya Dhar and Bhushan Bhatt. And today we'll talk about some current affairs, what is happening actually in Kashmir and problems associated with it. Welcome Vidya, welcome Bhushan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bala.
So what's happening now in Kashmir and Delhi? I think Bitta Karate, the trial has started. Bitta Karate is supposed to be a killer, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. Has it?
No?
Yes, Bhushan, I mean, the Bitta Karate case has been reopened.
Case has been reopened, yes.
Yeah,
Satish Teku's parents or probably his siblings have basically, taken up the matter with the High Court again, and the matter will be opened. So there is every possibility that he may be tried, and if not hanged, but at least he will be put behind the bars once again.
He's killed 30, 40 people. That's calls for the death sentence, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, it's going to be very difficult to prove because there aren't enough FIRs lodged, there aren't even enough evidences. That was one of the reasons why High Court, when a PIL was, filed by some Kashmiri groups a few years back in the Supreme Court of India about basically, opening the cases. The PIL was rejected on the basis that it's a too old case.
I am barred, yes.
That's basically a joke of the judiciary in India. Yeah. You can basically go back to Shastri's killings and Indira Gandhi's killings. Those are not old, but Kashmiri Hindu killings is old. So that's a farce.
You see, Bala,
yeah.
Actually there are so many people who had been temporarily arrested and who were let go. I can recall that the killers of two people, H.L. Khera, who was the general manager of HMT, and also Mushirul Haq, who was the vice chancellor of the Kashmir University, they were kidnapped and killed around, the same time, April of 1990. Okay. So in those cases, why were they kidnapped and why were they killed? Now, Khera was the general manager of HMT, Hindustan Machine Tools. It's an Indian presence in the valley. And Mushirul Haq was vice chancellor of the university, controlled by University Grants Commission, which is again an Indian presence. They wanted that Indian presence to be uprooted. But let me come back to the point. Those people were the killers. Everybody knew at that time who the killers were. For instance, when Maulvi Farooq, Muhammad Farooq, the father of the present Maulvi, when he was assassinated on 21st of May 1990, everyone knew who his killers were. So the killers were arrested, not that of Muhammad Farooq, but of Khera and Mushirul Haq. They went through some kind of a, mockery of a trial, and they were let off in 2019.
Why no evidence? No, 2019?
No, sorry, about 19 years later, which is 2009.
2009, yeah.
Yes. So that is what happened, because why I'm making this point is that whether Satish Teku's father or anybody else files PIL, it's not really a big step. It's again, we are trying to take initiative about the atrocities. It is the majority community and the government of the place, government of J&K and the government of India who have to wake up, who have to appoint a commission under maybe, some Supreme Court ex-judges, impartial commission. They have to have dedicated resources to gather back all the evidences and witnesses. Many of them are alive today, and then take a concerted action to start a process of healing and reconciliation.
Bhushan, we already add a point here. I mean, first of all, the person or a group of people who should be tried for the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus is none other than the erstwhile Chief Minister of Jammu Kashmir, Farooq Abdullah. As a constitutional head, so-called elected head, he left the valley to the dogs, literally. He resigned on 18th of January 1990 and ran away from the valley, leaving the administration in complete disarray. The Gaugadal massacre happened. The January 19th exodus of Kashmiri Hindus happened. The aftermath and the precursor of these events, the responsible leader is Farooq Abdullah. He should be basically, tried as a war criminal. It's akin to war. I mean, he left his people. I mean, people who trusted in him, who basically, whether it was the Kashmiri Hindus or the Kashmiri Muslims, they trusted in his leadership, and he ran away from, so we can call him, he was a Bagoda, not the Kashmiri Hindus. So
he went to London, he traveled to London, isn't it?
He traveled to London, leaving the valley absolutely with no administration till on 21st of January or 20th of January evening, when Jagmohan, the appointed governor, was finally landed in Kashmir. So people will blame, basically, that's the story which was created by the Western forces, that it was Jagmohan who basically, orchestrated the exodus. Jagmohan was not in the valley at all. The exodus had already started. So these stories should be exposed basically now.
Absolutely.
That's what I want to say here.
I would like to put Vidya Bhushan, I completely agree with you. About Farooq Abdullah, I would like to put it a little differently. He did not run away in the sense that he wanted to run away from responsibility. No, it's not that. It is not. Let me explain what I mean. He worked very hard to create the conditions of militancy. It was during his regime that all the militants, that thousands of guns came to the valley, that the youth were empowered, and an atmosphere was created where there was complete frenzy and complete support by the common man, by the common public, to these so-called militants who were terrorists, and they belonged to the majority community. So it was not that he left, or he left under a plan.
Yeah, purposely.
He left under a plan. Let us not say that he shunned responsibility. He left under a plan. He created everything. It's like, you bring in army or you bring in people to kill innocent people, and then you don't want the responsibility, because he remembered his father had been arrested for something, an action whereby his father wanted independence for. So he had that background, a psychological burden, that if he was exposed about the kind of things we are talking about, he might be arrested. He didn't want that. That's why he left for London voluntarily.
I mean, that means
to let the story happen, to let the massacre happen.
Exactly.
And
he may be the so-called messiah for his people, but
yes,
he left his own people, the Muslims of Kashmir, to die. And the glaring example was the Gaugadal massacre.
Right.
That's where Muslims were killed there.
Absolutely. There were a lot of Muslims who were killed by cross-firing with the security forces.
Yeah. That is where we have to draw the distinction. And this is where I find that the debates on the Indian channels are also not very clear,
Right.
When I talked earlier about Dr. Guru or Muhammad Farooq being assassinated, my question to those who are asking why were Muslims not included in the story of the Kashmir files is that when Muhammad Farooq was killed, his family did not have to flee. His relations did not have to flee, And when Dr. Guru, later in 1993, April, he was shot dead because there was basically, you have to understand a lot of things here. There was a fundamental conflict in Kashmiri Muslims about their aspirations, which are not even clear today. They are actually in a junkyard where they don't know, what is what. Now, some people said that we want independence. Others said we want to accede to Pakistan. And this conflict has remained there. They have absolutely no clarity, assuming that they had those kind of illegitimate and unpatriotic, aspirations.
Bhushan, I would like to add here something like very funny. You see, even today, the Kashmiri Muslims are gullible. Even today, they are not clear about what they are looking for or what they want actually. I mean, they are like a group of sheep who are basically herded by their masters, and they go and follow their masters without even having a rational. I'll give an example for that. It was a very common, Bala, it was a very common practice. I mean, Kashmir had no crime. I mean, it was a very peaceful place compared to many other parts of the country. I mean, it was a very peaceful place. It was a very, financially stable place. There were no poor people. Yeah. Even in minus 15-degree temperature, nobody died in Kashmir, as far as I know. Bhushan, you knows about it.
No homeless people.
So whether it was a Kashmiri Hindu or a Muslim or a Sikh or anybody else, like these are the three main, demographic setup in Kashmir. Even in the most abject, poverty, people still used to have a house, on their head, a roof on their head, something to eat, enough to make them sustain, even if it was frugal, maybe rice and some dal. But there was nobody poor as such, in Kashmir. So this was the general setup in Kashmir. There was no, crime. There was no poverty. But there was undercurrents was always like, most of the Kashmiri Muslims were always having an inclination towards Pakistan, and Kashmiri Hindus were looked upon as Indian agents, so-called Indian agents. They were not called the informers yet. I'm talking about like say 80s or 70s. But whenever there was anything which happened in the Muslim world, even if it was very trivial, Salman Rushdie wrote a book. Okay, there were a few houses were burned, some temples were vandalized, some people were beaten. It was a very common thing. Pakistan probably loses a match with West Indies, nothing to do with India or the government of India or even the Kashmiri Hindus, and still they will vandalize a few temples, they will vandalize a few houses. It was a common factor. So we were basically we grew up in that kind of an environment. We were basically always looked down upon as like they used to there was like a derogatory remark for us that we were dal eating Pandits, and they were like more masculine and macho than us, because they used to eat meat. So we were always like subjugated as a second-class citizen. So now I'll give an example of how I can tell the viewers that they were like completely misguided and confused. When Bhutto was hanged by Zia, so there was like a lot of agitations and arsons and looting and processions with Bhutto's placards, there's photos, and people even did the mourning. So as a Hindu, as I was a young boy that time, so okay, people are with Bhutto. And then a few years later, when Zia was basically killed in an air crash, the same thing happened.
Few months later.
Now you can imagine, who are you with? Are you with Bhutto's ideology? So they used to be the point is that the Kashmiri Muslims being gullible, they probably needed any reason to come on the streets.
And I wonder one question: are the majority of Kashmiri Muslims Shia or Sunni?
Sunni are more, yeah.
There's a big Shia community also.
Yes.
Very small, not a very big, but I mean comparatively maybe 80-20.
And what about the Kashmiri Pandits? What is this organization called Qanun Kashmir? I mean, do they want independence as Kashmir is an independent country?
Bhushan knows Qanun Kashmir more than anybody else. He can tell you more about it.
No,
they didn't want to be part of India. There must have been a section of Kashmiri Pandits who wanted independence in a separate country. Was there?
No, never, not at all. Geographically, politically, and otherwise, that is, they cannot thrive like that, because their heart and soul has been with Indian culture, the Kashmir culture, the Sharda culture, which is very close.
Qanun means what? Qanun Kashmir.
Qanun is mine. Qanun, our own Kashmir. So the aspiration was that because, you see, let me go back to a small point here. When they say that what has, say, BJP done or any other done, if I was just doing a bit of research, has there been any community in the world, a small community, who was protected under similar circumstances, either by army or by police or by the government? The answer is no. They can be protected only if they feel safe in the, under when the majority is a different kind of a religious community.
Right.
So it is essentially the responsibility of the majority community to create those conditions whereby we feel safe. We don't even feel safe today, because a Kashmiri Pandit who had chosen to stay back, a very prominent businessman, Makhanlal Bindru, a good friend of mine,
He was
shot dead only in October of 2021.
After 30 years.
Yeah.
After 32 years. And I used to ask him that time, why don't you also come? I'm leaving. He would say, oh, they won't do anything to me. They are my own brothers. I give them medicine at midnight, because he had medical business. When a terrorist who is shot by people and chased by people, I provide service to him. So if they can't, if a person like that can't be safe there, who can be, unless that general atmosphere in society? It's the majority which has to create those conditions much before anybody else can. The police or anybody else cannot protect the minority, which is the Hindu community of Kashmiris. Coming back to Panun Kashmir, the aspiration was, I was associated with that movement for many years. I still am sentimentally, which means that, or we have seen history for the last 600, 700 years. From being 100% Kashmiri Hindus, in 1947, we were reduced to 7% or 10% Kashmiri Hindus in the valley. And from that, we are now reduced to 0.1%. If you look at the history of, all these centuries, and especially the history after 1990, is it possible for the Kashmiri Hindus to live again among the majority who have always proved to be unreliable, and they have not proved to be reliable in friendship or in society? Now, they said that we want a separate geographical area in the northeast of Kashmir, which should be having majority of Kashmiri Hindus, and it should be administered as a union territory of the government of India. So create a new union territory for where they have all the rights, all the management, they are the rulers and they are the subject. That was the idea. It's still there.
There was this counterpoints, people like Arundhati Roy and the left-wing people, they say, the Kashmiri Pandits were oppressing the Muslims and they were the landlords, they had all the good jobs. And this is one of the reasons for they called it uprising. This is what is being talked about for all these years.
I'll reply that. It was not Arundhati Roy, it was Barkha Dutt, basically.
Both. Even Arundhati Roy has said that, yes, both.
Yeah, but on the records, which was shown in the Kashmir file also, that it was basically a class rift.
Yeah.
It was the rich versus poor. Let me take you back, basically, to 1947 and the aftermath of that. Kashmiri Hindus was 100% literate class, even in 1950. If not 100%, let's say at least 80% of the Kashmiri Hindus were, literate, and they were basically the backbone of the government services. Kashmiri Muslims were probably educated 30% or so. So it was very obvious that most of the jobs, basically, whether it is the engineering department, whether it's the agriculture, research, scientists, doctors, pharmacists, bankers, they all will be Kashmiri Hindus, right? And the rest, and they used to basically, because since they were well off from centuries, not from centuries, I can say after the Sikh rule came in, they became the administrators, and so they were basically allotted lands. These lands were tilled by the local Muslims. Let me tell you something, Bala, here, very, very important. You see, it's a very intriguing part of the history that Muslims ruled Kashmir from 1325 till the Sikh rule came in. And after the Sikh rule came the Dogra rule. Right? Till Afghans were in Kashmir and they were ousted by the Sikhs. No Kashmiri Muslim ever came in prominence. The reason for that is because most of the Kashmiri Muslims, they are neo-converted Muslims.
Okay.
Right? And there's a concept of Ashrafi Muslim and a Pasmanda Muslim in the Muslim societies. And the established Muslims or the Ashrafi Muslims, they don't trust the neo-Muslims. So even if when it comes to basically the different regimes, whether it was the Mughals, whether it was the Chucks, whether it was the Afghans, most of the times the administrator in power were with Hindus. It's not that government of India or the government of Kashmir did anything. It was happening in the past. You'll be surprised that the Prime Minister of Afghanistan 100 years back was a Kashmiri Pandit, Nandaram Tikku. I mean, Afghanistan 100 years back was a Muslim-dominated place, but its prime minister was a Kashmiri Hindu. So because of their administrative powers, it's same thing. For example, in US today, we have Sundar Pichai. It is not because they saw he's a Hindu or he's a particular faith person, because of his capabilities. So this thing continued even till 47. And Sheikh Abdullah as a leader did everything to, destroy this setup. He did two things after he came back in power in 1953. The first thing was Land to the Tiller Act.
Land to the Tiller.
So all the land was snatched overnight from the Kashmiri Hindus, overnight, and without any compensation. Like my grandfather had what we call the Chak Jagir. Bhushanji's parents and grandparents had it.
We still have.
But you don't have any right on it.
Yeah,
it's been taken away. So overnight, the tiller became the owner without any compensation. The second thing what they did also was the abolition of Moneylender Act. So money lending was basically a kind of a banking system in Kashmir, mostly owned by Kashmiri Hindus.
Mm-hmm.
So overnight, their outstandings in the market was zeroed. All the ledgers and books were taken away by the government without any compensation. So, what we can say very easily, that the Sheikh Abdullah regime, the Abdullahs, they snatched every morsel. They tried to snatch every morsel from the Kashmiri Hindus' mouth and feed it to the Muslims. And despite that, the Kashmiri Hindus survived because of their caliber, because of their education. They survived. And after that, what happened was, as I said in my previous program also, Bala, that terrorism is not just when somebody takes guns or bullets. Terrorism can be of different kinds. Say, for example, the first terrorism which was inflicted on Kashmiri Hindus was that we were the only state in the entire country where our mother tongue was not taught of. Kashmiri language, Sharda, is the mother of two great languages in the world. It's Pali, which most of the Buddhist scriptures are written, and Gurmukhi. Even the Ek Omkar, which is basically the symbol of Sikhism, comes from Sharda.
There was a script, eh?
There is a script.
Yeah,
there is
a script. It's not
absolutely nothingness now. There are no books, no journals, no exams.
Where are those? It's all gone? Destroyed, or they're
not educated? They're not educated. I mean, the government of India basically didn't, allow it. Or I can say the government of Jammu Kashmir in cognizance, in support with the central government. So our language got reduced to just a spoken language. While you'll be surprised that when the first, the Central Translation Bureau was established in Government of India, in the first amendment, Kashmiri language written in Nastaliq on the rupee note still says Hat Rupi or Akh Rupi. So it was, Kashmiri language was there, but it was written in Persian script. It was not allowed. Now you will be surprised that what Pakistan did, Sheikh Abdullah did the same thing in Kashmir. He put Urdu as an official language. Now you tell me, for heaven's sake, what had Urdu to do with Kashmiris? Nothing. It is exactly the same thing, like Urdu was inflicted on Pakistanis who were either
Punjabis,
who were either Balochs, who were either Punjabis, Gujaratis or Sindhis. They had nothing to do with Urdu. On the same lines, Urdu was forced upon Kashmir. And then there was something what we call a religious divide was created in schools.
In schools, yes.
All the government schools which were funded, not the government schools which were funded by the government with grants, they were basically told in a kind of a non-verbal communication system that all the Hindus will read Hindi and all the Muslims will read Urdu. They were like probably 90% of the school setup. I have been educated in that setup. Bhushanji has been educated in that setup. We were devoid of studying Urdu. We read Hindi and they read Urdu. So you can imagine when our class 4 period is coming, all the Muslims are going to one class and all the Hindus are going to one class. So you are creating a religious divide, you're creating a racial profiling kind of a thing. And over a period of time, Urdu was basically made the official language in the court. It was made official language in the law and order judiciary, in land records. So what will basically eventually happen that as Vidya Bhushan Dhar or Bhushan Bhatt, we won't find a job in the government.
No, Hindi is not an official language.
Hindi is not basically allowed there.
No, let me put a point here. Actually, Urdu was became the language of not common man, but it was forced upon the common man much before 1947. All right.
Yeah, and then it was made official.
In 19th century end. I can tell you this, my father came from a rural area. He did not know Hindi. He knew only Urdu and Farsi.
Right.
And as that means that everybody was studying only Urdu in the rural areas and in the most of the areas in the valley. With the result that I know both the languages. I can write and read Urdu as well as I can read and write because of
that even during the Sikh rule also the same thing. Did it come
before? Sikh rule came earlier, and I think Dogra rule also it was there.
During the Dogra rule, this Urdu continued.
Absolutely.
But Urdu, Hindi, and Sanskrit also continued because my dad knows all the three.
Yes. So it continued, especially in rural areas, and it became one of the distortions, a permanent distortions in the valley, which is living up to today also. So these are the very ground that was created, the very atmosphere that was created during all these decades, especially since 1931. When Sheikh Vidya wanted to come into prominence as a leader of the masses, when there was that on 13th of July of that year, there was an attack on the jail and they wanted to free some of the prisoners. There were riots. In those riots, many people were killed and Kashmiri Hindus became victims for nothing just because they were Kashmiri Hindus. So that has continued, for decades and decades and decades. And in 1947, we had anything between 7 and 10% Kashmiri Hindus in the valley. Why would they dwindle? Vidya Bhushan hinted to that because there was, on the one hand, Hindus, most of them, 70-80%, who were eligible for different state jobs, were eligible for different admissions to professional colleges, who would qualify in normal course. They would not give those seats to them. They would not give those jobs to them. So they had to hunt for the jobs elsewhere in India. Oh, you got jobs in India. You are Indians. These jobs are meant for us. Initially, in the line of teachers, there were more teachers among Kashmiri Hindus.
90% probably.
Yes, 90%. But later on, they started giving those jobs also according to proportion of population. That means if there are 100 jobs available, only about 5 or 6 will be given to Hindus. The rest will be given to the majority community. So that continued in admissions, in state jobs, and the number of Hindus. I'm just answering the point that Hindus were in dominant position, Jagirdars and other things, Jagirdari and other thing had gone, before 47. Land Tillers Act came soon after Sheikh Vidya came. And so did the, other act, which is the Moneylender Act. Those things were slowly abolished even before 47. They had gone. When people are resorting to these kind of, these kind of defenses and these kinds of arguments, they're just falsifying a lot of things, including history. They take you back to a time when things were absolutely different. We are talking about last 40, 50, 70, 80 years, And during these years, the discrimination continued because India was independent now and Kashmir was a part of it. So these discriminations were allowed to be flourished in this part under the different dispensations in the government of India. And why the fault lies there, why they were allowed to flourish when VP Singh's government was there, when Congress governments were there. Indira Gandhi, in a letter to one of the Kashmiri Hindus who had pleaded for some kind of discrimination against professional seat or college, conceded, it's a written letter, you can check it, that I know that Kashmiri Hindus are being discriminated against, but I cannot do much about it. What kind of a response is this from a prime minister of the country who belongs to the same community? These are some of the wounds which need to be healed. These are some of the wrongs of history which need to be corrected. And it's going to take time. It's going to, before it takes time, it's going to take the understanding. A Kashmiri Muslim should not argue today that Hindus went because of this reason, Jagmohan. They should accept. No healing will be possible if they do not accept the mistakes that they committed. The most terrible part of the story is that lies have been told. We have never been told the truth. Kashmiri Muslims have never accepted the truth of what they have gone through because of themselves over the last so many decades. They have to first reconcile with themselves as a society. What is the truth they want? What did they want ultimately? As Vidya Bhushan also said, they were confused, completely confused.
And they still are.
Like sheep. They are not.
I will conclude this, Bala. Like, one of the questions, like what a lot of people after seeing the Kashmir files was like, only the Hindu cause was shown, the Muslim cause was not shown. Now, let me tell you, the people who died, the Kashmiri Muslims who died, who were those people? Did they die because they were Muslims? No, they didn't die because they were Muslims. They died because they were basically either supporting any government machinery like police or paramilitary forces. They died because they were basically supporting the Indian flag, or they died because they were considered to be the informers for government of India. They died because of those reasons, not because they were Muslims. While the Kashmiri Hindus who died, they died mostly for the reason because they were Kashmiri Hindus. And there was no place for Kashmiri Hindus in a place which they wanted to basically create Nizam-e-Mustafa or the order of Islam there. That was one of the key things. Now, if the quantum of terrorism was the same, 99.9% Hindus left the valley, while 99% of the Kashmiri Hindus stayed in the valley. So that simply says that the equation was not the same. It was basically a plan, a proper plan, which basically was executed by Kashmiris. As I always say on different platforms, I was not basically ousted by any mercenary or any terrorist from Pakistan. I was ousted from my place, my herd and earth, by my neighbor, by my class fellow, by my friends, by my muezzin across in the mosque who wanted to basically use up my property. So after they looted the houses. They later on dismantled the houses brick by brick and sold our stuff on the streets of Kashmir as Bhatt Saman. So that is the kind of what you call the looter mentality.
Yeah, let us hope there is some justice and some healing that takes place. I think we should continue this discussion next week as part 3, and we'll go deeper into this issue. I think it's very illuminating information, because most people don't know what really happened in Kashmir. And since you know the background and the history and what needs to be done in the future. Thank you, Vidya, and thank you, Bhushan. And we'll meet next week again and continue with this discussion.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. This is VNN signing off for this week. Thank you.